In the Midwest, it's common practice to bake a cake or a pie for a community dinner, a church supper, or a school bake sale. Whether it's of Scandinavian or German origin, made with world-famous but locally farmed dairy, or filled with orchard fruit, one thing is certain: it will always be delicious. Here are 4 enticing desserts that you must try. A succulent, sour cherry pie from Michigan. A gooey butter cake made famous in St. Louis. A Kransakaka. This is something that would be served by a Norwegian family to celebrate a wedding or a holiday. And an unusual but delicious navy bean pie, made in Chicago originally. I think you'll find it enticing. All on today's Martha Bakes. When the cherry orchards along the banks of Lake Michigan are bursting with ripe fruit, Midwesterners celebrate by baking pies, cherry pies. Today I'm making a traditional double-crusted cherry pie with a pretty polka-dotted crust. The pâte brisée, it's the same recipe I've been teaching you for quite a long time, but I'll give you a refresher course. 2½ cups all-purpose flour and 2 sticks of butter cut into small pieces, and make sure it is icy cold. We want a flaky, buttery, easy to roll crust that is exactly the right texture. 1 teaspoon of kosher salt. And now pulse, breaking up the butter into the flour. Now iced water. About 1/4 cup will probably do. But make sure you have no ice, just iced water. It'll make a wet spot, and when you try to roll it, it'll just be a hole, basically. So as you're pulsing, add drop by drop of water. And you'll need, depending on the humidity on your flour, anywhere from 1/4 cup to sometimes even 1/2 cup. That was 1/3 cup of water. And have your plastic wrap ready. Take out half the dough and just put it right on your plastic wrap. And I use the plastic wrap to form the disc. And you can just flatten it like this. And your second disc of dough. So chill these. For the filling, 2 pounds of fresh tart cherries that have already been pitted. Into the cherries, put 1/4 cup of cornstarch. Cornstarch will help thicken the baking juices and really make for a perfect pie. And 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla. And if you prefer, you could use a little bit of fresh lemon juice. And 1 cup of sugar to 2 pounds of pitted cherries. And then stir with a spatula. Doesn't that look good? And now, as far as rolling out the crust, bench flour your rolling surface. Have a 9-inch glass pie plate at the ready. And roll this larger than the pie plate. A well-made pâte brisée. It's always such a relief when it rolls out like this and doesn't crack and doesn't break and is just perfect. Roll up your crust and roll out your crust. Okay, so here we have a crust that's still nice and cool. Put your cherries right into it. So beautiful. And they smell extraordinary. So this butter, 2 tablespoons. It gives an extra richness to the juices of the pie. There. Now you can put that right on your baking pan lined with parchment, because this is probably going to drip. And you can chill this until you get the top crust ready. And now we're rolling out our top crust. Again, keep moving it around on your floured surface. And this should be, again, just slightly larger than 9 inches. And for decoration as well as function, use a little tiny biscuit cutter. And we're going to do, I think, 9 little holes. And now we have to get that right on the pie. So we can roll this crust again on the pin, and then try to center your holes on the top of the pie. Press the crust all around, right on the edge. And I use scissors, leaving about a 1/2 inch overhang. I love pie crust. So now, what I like to do is roll this under like that. We want to seal the edge so that the juices don't run out. Now, everybody has a different method for this crimping. Actually, a spoon works really, really well. You can use any kind of spoon to push like this, and it makes kind of a nice crimp. Now, do a little bit of egg wash for a golden brown crust. Don't put big globs of egg on the top. Carefully wash it. Doesn't that look pretty? And this will go into the freezer for 20 minutes. After 20 minutes, put this right in a 375-degree preheated oven. Very important, on the middle rack. Now this pie cooks for a long time, 1 hour and 45 minutes, until the juices in that center hole are bubbling. Cool your pie completely before serving. And I love the way these cherries look, and I would just embellish with some cherries still on the stem. So pretty. Enjoy. Legend has it that gooey butter cake was invented accidentally in St. Louis in the 1930s when a baker made an error while making his coffee cake recipe. Rather than tossing out the result, he cut it into squares and sold it, and a local tradition was born. So I'll show you how to make gooey butter cake. First, proof 1 package of active dry yeast and about 1/4 cup of warm milk. The milk should be no more than 105 degrees. And this is what's going to make this cake rise in the pan. Pan has been buttered and lined with parchment, and the parchment's also been buttered. And you can clip down the excess parchment, which helps you lift out the gooey butter cake when it's done, lift out from the pan. So this is, and these little clips are really great for holding the parchment in place. Now, simple simple recipe. Cream 1 stick of butter, 8 tablespoons, with 1/4 cup of sugar. There's not much in this cake, but the result is odd and different and gooey. 2 cups of all-purpose flour. We're just gonna mix this a little bit with a teaspoon of salt. These are our dry ingredients. And the butter is getting a nice creamy yellow color. And we're going to add an egg at a time, 2 eggs altogether. Get that nice and light and creamy. And milk, even 1/4 cup of milk makes a softer crust that'll brown more quickly due to the sugar and the butter fat in the milk. Get the eggs well incorporated into the butter and sugar. And now you can just add the flour a little bit at a time on low speed. And this is basically a kind of a rich bread dough, but it would make a very small loaf of bread. You're gonna have the yeast mixture. Proofing yeast in milk creates breads which are richer and have a more velvety texture than those proofed in water. And now just scrape it down and then beat for a minute or 2 just to get a nice elastic dough. And that's it. Press the dough by hand into a 9 by 13-inch glass baking dish. This is the base of the coffee cake. So use a little offset spatula. It doesn't have to be perfect because the finished cake is far from perfect looking. Okay, cover loosely with plastic wrap. Warm spot out of the sun. Let rise for approximately an hour. So after an hour, the dough has almost doubled in bulk. So just keep it covered till you make the topping. Now the topping is what makes the goo. And it's, again, a kind of a peculiar topping. 2 sticks of butter, 1 1/3 cups of granulated sugar, You could add a tablespoon of vanilla, whole tablespoon. 1 egg and 1 egg yolk. And don't forget 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt. Dip in your cup measure, and it's 1 1/3 cups of flour and 1/4 cup of light corn syrup, and the rest of the flour, and the rest of the corn syrup. Corn syrup has the ability to resist crystallization and used here to keep the topping soft and gooey. And there you have your sticky topping. Spread this evenly all over the dough, trying not to deflate what's risen below. Looks good. Make sure your oven is preheated to 350 degrees. This is going to bake for about 20 minutes. Now, this cake is going to rise and fall in waves as it bakes, and it'll have a golden brown top, but it'll still be kind of liquidy in the center when it's finished. So get that right into the oven. Set your timer. Take the gooey butter cake out of the oven as soon as the top becomes a light golden brown. It looks sort of like the surface of Mars. Let it cool and remove the clips. You can lift the whole thing right out of the pan. And you can put it right on a serving platter. And before serving, just dust the top lightly with some confectioner's sugar. Cut it into squares and serve. Crispy on the top, soft on the bottom, gooey in the middle. A very fortuitous accident, don't you think? Enjoy. During the 1800s and into the early 1900s, many Norwegian immigrants settled in the Midwest, where they found the weather and the geography quite similar to their native land. They brought many cherished recipes with them, including this one for Kransakaka, the quintessential celebration cake of Norway. The dough itself is to be made in the processor. 8 ounces of blanched sliced almonds and 1/2 teaspoon of salt. And first grind the almonds until they're fine, almost a dust. That looks nice and fine. Add 3 cups of confectioner's sugar. Seems like a lot, but remember, this makes 18 rings. You can find these in the Norwegian bakeries when you go to visit in Norway. I've done that by boat. It's the most beautiful trip. And mix that all together. And then you can just pour 2 egg whites right down the feed tube. And when it finally all comes together, the dough will have the texture of a fine cookie dough and be very malleable and a ball. I think it's done. You're basically making an almond paste. Now I'm going to put this right on a piece of plastic wrap. It's very sticky, and it'll be handled much better if you have the plastic wrap. You want to make this into a block. So press it as you would a pâte brisée or any other kind of pastry dough. And that's your almond paste, your almond dough. Wrap it very tightly and put it in the refrigerator overnight. Now, believe it or not, these metallic circles are the Kransakaka molds. You can buy these in Scandinavian import outlets, or you can actually find them online very easily. And butter the molds. Each one of these little indentations is a ring in which you'll bake the dough. My original set of Kransakaka molds were a series of individual rings made out of aluminum, which I still have, but these are so much more efficient and so much more sensible. Now I've done one already to show you. There is one whole set, a little bit more than 1/4 of an inch in diameter, snakes of dough, and then you form the rings with those snakes and take a piece of the dough and start to roll. Work the dough, make it malleable, and then start rolling it into the snakes. Are you a Play-Doh aficionado? You have to be in order to make the perfect Kransakaka. So just make the round circle, pinch off what you don't need, and piece together. And keep going until you fill all the rings. Place the dough on an unrimmed baking sheet and make sure your oven is preheated to 300 degrees. Have fun. So bake only one tray at a time, about 30 minutes, in the middle rack of your oven. Now, look, this is when they come out of the oven. Isn't this the cutest thing? It does look like a child's game. So transfer every ring to a cooling rack, and then the glue, the icing is very easy to make. It's 3 large egg whites. Beat those until they're fluffy, and it's 1 pound of confectioner sugar that we've sifted. So we got all the lumps out of it. And then just add your sugar. And the icing will be able to be piped out of a piping bag, and I have the bag fitted with a very small tip, a number 3. So here is our lovely, very fine royal icing. Get that right into your pastry bag. Now you can actually, if you don't want to use fresh egg whites, and some people can't, you can use meringue powder, 5 tablespoons of meringue powder mixed with a ½ cup of water. That's a good substitution. And to glue, I suggest just putting a ring of royal icing right on the top. Place your next ring and continue until you get the whole thing glued together. Try not to drip. If you stay like on the highest part of the ring, the glue will work. Almost like a inverted cone. And it doesn't really matter what goes on the inside. It's the outside that you want to keep kind of pristine. One cultural tradition is for the bride and groom in a Norwegian wedding to lift the top layer of the cake at their wedding. The number of cake rings that stick to the top when they lift it is said to be the number of children the couple will have. Heaven forbid if the whole thing comes up, that will be 18 children. Another thing that is sometimes done at a wedding is a bottle of champagne is put inside the ring, and it is saved by the bride and groom for their first anniversary. And here is our final ring. Decorated with icing like this cake is perfect for any celebration. And by the way, it happens to be gluten-free. Enjoy. Joining me from Martha's kitchen is Jason Schreiber, who has baked all kinds of pies in your lengthy career of how many years have you been baking?
Well, I've been
baking
baking
since... You look like 12, except you have a beard.
I've been baking since I was less than 12, so 20-year career baking, let's say.
20, okay. And today, he's sharing an unusual recipe with Chicago roots that's made with a healthy, protein-packed pantry staple. Can you guess what it is, Jason?
It's beans.
I've never made a pie made out of beans.
I had never heard of one either.
So these are just dried beans?
These are dried beans that we soaked overnight, and we did try making it with canned beans just to see.
And it's mushy and awful, right?
Not nearly as good.
No, I can't imagine.
So it's worth it. We started out with 1 cup of dried navy beans. We just covered them with cold water, let them sit out overnight. Now we're just going to drain and rinse those. We'll throw away this liquid because it's not good.
Right. And then cook them?
Yeah, just put them in the saucepan, cover them with 3 cups of water.
Okay, and we have the water here.
We have the water.
And did you change the rinse water at all during the soaking?
Nope, just left it overnight.
Okay. Good.
All right, so that will just bring up to a boil, and then we'll let it simmer slowly. And we cook them really low temperature so that they don't fall apart because the little peels tend to come out if you boil them
you're
too
right.
hard.
So here are the cooked ones. So we
Those
have
are
swap
cooked
out.
ones, so we can put this aside for now.
So 1 cup only. So
We're only going to use 1 cup in this recipe, but the rest of the beans you can use for soup, right into the blender.
Okay.
All right.
1 cup.
And we're going to make the whole thing right in this blender.
Oh, okay.
So then we're going to add 4 eggs.
Okay, you can break 2.
Okay.
I can. Ooh, look at that giant egg.
It's a nice egg.
So big. Okay, so it's unusual too to make a pie filling in a blender. Oh, and evaporated milk, one of my favorite things.
Yep, the whole can of evaporated milk.
Okay. And I do find it's easier just to pour it out of the can, don't you?
Mm-hmm.
And to make it even easier, I make 3 little notches. So this is whole milk that is evaporated for canning, and that's why no sugar added.
Not into the milk, but
No.
we will add sugar to the pie.
Yes. Okay.
2 teaspoons of cinnamon. Just gonna,
How much sugar? 1 cup?
and 1 cup of sugar, yeah.
And 4 tablespoons of melted butter.
Yes.
Melted and cooled.
And we also need 2 tablespoons of flour.
That's it. Oh.
Just enough to hold it together. There's starch in the beans.
So this is like a bean custard.
Basically,
Okay.
yeah.
There.
All right, so we're just gonna put the lid on tightly and puree it.
So this is a Chicago Depression pie when people couldn't afford anything else, but they had sugar.
They had sugar and eggs, I guess.
Yeah, you could make
You can make a pie out of beans, who knew? So I'm just gonna strain it into a measuring cup just in case there's any bean pieces, because we don't want any of that.
Okay, I'll push it through.
All right.
I love doing that. And show the beautiful crust that you've made.
So yeah, we're just gonna put it into a blind baked pie crust. This is our standard brisée. And I did find if you're using the spoon crimp, you wanna keep it pretty cold before you bake it. So make sure you really give it a good freeze before you put it in the oven. All right, so we're just gonna put all of this right into our blind baked crust.
It's a beautiful crust.
Thank you. And sometimes it's easier to do that last bit when you're closer to the oven so you don't spill it. So I'm just
I'll carry that. You carry that.
Okay,
I'll
open.
open the oven for you.
And I learned from you to look where I'm walking
And
instead of at
don't
the
look at the pie because it makes you too nervous.
Yeah,
And you know, it works.
it really does. All right, so maybe we can just top
Here,
that
You
off.
can do that. Set your timer for 50 minutes. It might take 60 minutes to set the filling. What an easy pie.
It's a really easy pie.
So here is our pie. It looks kind of like a pumpkin pie.
And we did try it a couple different ways, and we liked it better at room temperature. So
Then cold.
yeah, so bake it early enough for it to cool, but don't bake it the night before. There's one. Thank you. And you can serve
Looks
it with
good.
yeah, you can serve it with some lightly sweetened whipped cream if you
I
want.
want some of that. Would you like some?
Sure, just a little. Thank you.
So this is my first taste, not really, of a bean pie. Your dinner guests will never guess what the main ingredient is. Really good.
It's really good.
Jason, thank you very much. This is excellent. All of you will add this pie, once you taste it, to your pie repertoire. See you next time on Martha Bakes. Glue or secure the first layer to the turntable with a dab of frosting. Brush off any loose crumbs with a pastry brush. Spread a layer of frosting on the bottom layer evenly. Top the bottom layer with a second cake layer. Spread a thin coat of frosting over the top and sides of the cake. This will seal in any stray crumbs before the final coat is applied.